The ivory towers of São Paulo's financial district cast long shadows over the city below. Inside the penthouse boardroom of Imperio Global, Xavier Montero leaned back in his Italian leather chair, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the trembling man across the table. "Mr. Oliveira, do you understand what failure costs in my world?" Xavier's voice was soft but carried the weight of countless destroyed careers. The room fell silent, executives averting their gaze from the impending execution of yet another dream. Eduardo Oliveira, a civil engineer with 30 years of experience and calloused hands, clutched his proposal with whitened knuckles. "Mr. Montero, if you would just reconsider, my design would preserve the historical neighborhood while still costing me millions," Xavier cut in, rising from his chair. At 42, he commanded the room with the casual arrogance that came from amassing a fortune that rivaled some nations' GDPs. "Your sentimental attachment to crumbling buildings doesn't concern me. This meeting is over." With a flick of his wrist, Xavier signaled security. As the guards moved toward Eduardo, the engineer's dignity collapsed. "Please," he begged, tears forming in his eyes. "This project is all I have left. My wife. Your personal problems are not my concern," Xavier said coldly, turning his back on the man's distress. "Perhaps you should have considered your financial situation before wasting my time with inferior proposals." The boardroom emptied, leaving Xavier alone with his assistant Sophia. "Was that necessary?" she asked, her voice careful but challenging. Xavier's expression remained impassive. "Weakness is a luxury I never afforded myself. Why should I extend it to others?" Later that evening, Xavier's chauffeur navigated through unexpected traffic in a modest neighborhood. A festival had closed several streets, forcing his Bentley to detour through narrow passages lined with simple homes and vibrant market stalls. "Drive faster," Xavier commanded, not bothering to look up from his phone. "Sir, there are pedestrians everywhere," the driver protested. Xavier's irritated retort died on his lips as his eyes caught a flash of movement. A young woman stood in the glow of lantern light, helping an elderly vendor arrange flowers at a humble stall. Her laughter carried through his partially opened window, a sound so genuine it seemed alien to his world of calculated pleasantries. When she turned, Xavier felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: surprise. Her features were uncomplicated by cosmetic enhancements or practiced expressions. Her simple white dress moved with the evening breeze, and her eyes, even from a distance, held an intelligence that wasn't seeking advantage or opportunity. "Stop the car," he ordered suddenly. As Xavier stepped out, ignoring his driver's protests about their schedule, he moved toward the flower stall as if drawn by an invisible force. The crowd parted instinctively before him, sensing power even without recognizing his face. The young woman was arranging lilies when she noticed his approach. Her smile, initially welcoming, faltered slightly at his formal attire and intense gaze. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice melodious but confident. Before Xavier could respond, a commotion arose from behind the stall. Eduardo Oliveira emerged, his earlier despair replaced by protective fury as he recognized the billionaire. "You," Eduardo shouted, moving to stand between Xavier and the young woman. "Have you come to humiliate me in front of my daughter too?" Xavier's perfect composure slipped for the first time in years as he stared at the woman, the daughter of the man whose career and dignity he had crushed mere hours ago. Her eyes now reflected understanding and something that pierced Xavier, more deeply than contempt ever could: pity. "Papa, who is this man?" she asked, her hand gentle on her father's shoulder. "This is Xavier Montero," Eduardo answered bitterly. "The man who thinks money gives him the right to destroy lives." Xavier stood frozen, suddenly aware that all his billions couldn't purchase what this man possessed. The protective love reflected in his daughter's eyes. "Isabella," Eduardo said, "stay away from men like him." But Xavier couldn't look away from Isabella, whose gaze held him accountable in a way no business rival or board member ever had. In that moment, something long dormant stirred within him. Recognition that the empire he'd built might be nothing more than an elaborate fortress protecting an empty throne. 3 weeks later, Xavier stood at his office window. The city sprawled beneath him like a scale model he could rearrange at will. But his thoughts weren't on acquisitions or stock prices. They circled obsessively around a flower stall and a woman whose disapproval had somehow become more important than the admiration of business titans. "Sir, the Oliveira file you requested," Sophia said, placing a folder on his desk with unveiled curiosity. Xavier waited until she left before opening it. The contents were sparse. Eduardo Oliveira had led a modest but dignified life. A respected engineer whose wife had died of cancer 5 years ago, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. Isabella Oliveira, 28, taught literature at a community college, volunteered at a literacy program for underprivileged children, and had never married. No scandals, no leverage points, nothing Xavier could exploit. He closed the file, disgusted with himself for even considering such tactics. The intercom buzzed. The permits for the Villa Maddalena project were approved this morning. His legal director announced triumphantly, "We can begin demolition next week." Xavier stared at the scale model on his desk, the historic neighborhood where Eduardo's design had attempted to preserve cultural heritage while still allowing development, where Isabella sold flowers at a community festival. "Cancel it," Xavier said abruptly. "Sir?" The voice crackled with disbelief. "I said cancel it. Find another location." Before his director could protest, Xavier ended the call. He'd never explained his decisions before. He wouldn't start now. That evening, Xavier dismissed his driver and walked alone through Villa Maddalena. The neighborhood pulsed with authentic life. Street musicians, families sharing meals on small balconies, elderly men playing chess in the square. The world he'd spent his life conquering but never bothering to understand. He found the community college easily enough. Standing across the street, Xavier watched as Isabella emerged from the building, laughing with a colleague. Students greeted her warmly as she passed. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that owed nothing to power or position. When she noticed him, her laughter faded. She said goodbye to her colleague and approached Xavier with cautious steps. "Mr. Montero," she acknowledged. "Are you lost?" "Perhaps I am," he admitted, the words carrying more truth than he intended. Isabella studied him, wariness mingling with curiosity. "My father told me what happened at your company. He hasn't been able to find work since." The accusation hit, harder than any business rival's attack. "That's why I'm here," Xavier said. "I've reconsidered his proposal." Suspicion flashed in her eyes. "Why would you do that?" "Because he was right," Xavier replied simply. The admission felt foreign on his tongue. "You expect me to believe the butcher of boardrooms suddenly developed a conscience?" She crossed her arms. "What do you really want, Mr. Montero?" Xavier considered lying, crafting a response that would make him appear noble, but something about Isabella demanded honesty. "I want to understand why your opinion of me matters when no one else's has in years." His unexpected vulnerability caught her off guard. Isabella's expression softened slightly. "My father is having dinner at Café Flore right now," she said after a moment. "If you're serious about his proposal, you should tell him yourself." "Will you be there?" The question escaped before Xavier could reconsider. "Would that affect your decision to help my father?" "No," Xavier answered honestly, "but it would make the evening less intimidating." A reluctant smile tugged at Isabella's lips. Xavier Montero, intimidated? I find that hard to believe. "You'd be surprised," he murmured. The small cafe was nothing like the Michelin-starred restaurants Xavier frequented. The tablecloths were faded, the silverware mismatched. Eduardo's shock at seeing Xavier approach their table quickly turned to confusion when Isabella explained the situation. "I don't understand," Eduardo said warily. "You humiliated me in front of your entire board." "I was wrong," Xavier stated, the words unfamiliar but necessary. "Your design preserves what matters while still allowing progress. If you're willing, I'd like to implement it." Eduardo's eyes narrowed. Why the change of heart? Xavier glanced at Isabella, who was watching him with careful assessment. Let's just say I've been forced to reconsider my priorities. As they discussed the project, Xavier noticed how Isabella observed him, measuring every word, every gesture against some internal standard he couldn't decipher. When she smiled at something he said, the triumph he felt surpassed any business victory. "You're different than I expected," she admitted later as they walked through the neighborhood after dinner. "How so?" "You actually listened to my father, tonight. Really listened. I didn't think men like you knew how." Xavier considered her words. "Men like me rarely encounter women like you. And what kind of woman am I, Mr. Montero?" There was a challenge in her voice. "The kind who sees people instead of assets or obstacles," he replied. "The kind I've been avoiding my entire life because you make the world complicated." She laughed then, the sound warming something long cold within him. "Maybe complicated is exactly what you need." As they reached her building, Isabella grew serious again. "If this project is some elaborate scheme to get to me, know that I will never forgive you for giving my father false hope." Xavier met her, gazed directly. "For the first time in my life, I'm not scheming, and that terrifies me more than you can imagine." As he walked away, Xavier felt her eyes following him. He had built an empire through calculated risks, but nothing had prepared him for the risk of being seen, truly seen, by someone who owed him nothing and expected nothing in return. The man who returned to his penthouse that night was not the same one who had left it. The change was imperceptible to anyone watching, but Xavier felt it in every heartbeat, like the first hairline fracture in a dam that had held back everything human within him for decades. The Villa Maddalena project flourished under Eduardo's guidance. Xavier had given him complete creative control, something unprecedented in Imperio Global's history. The neighborhood transformation became a model of respectful development, preserving historical facades while modernizing interiors, creating community spaces where residents gathered to celebrate rather than protest. Xavier found himself visiting the site frequently, ostensibly to check progress. In reality, he hoped for glimpses of Isabella, who sometimes brought lunch to her father. "Your reputation is suffering," remarked Mateus Ferreira, Xavier's oldest friend and chief financial officer, during their weekly squash game. "The board is whispering that you've gone soft." Xavier slammed the ball with unnecessary force. "Let them whisper. This is about the engineer's daughter, isn't it?" Mateus lowered his racket. "Xavier, I've known you since boarding school. You've never let anyone affect your judgment." "I'm not discussing this," Xavier replied coldly. "She's from a different world," Mateus persisted. "What happens when she discovers who you really are?" The question haunted Xavier as he showered, after the match. Who was he really? The ruthless tycoon who destroyed careers without remorse? Or someone else? Someone buried beneath years of calculated ambition? That evening, he invited Isabella to dinner. To his surprise, she suggested a simple restaurant in her neighborhood instead of the exclusive venues he frequented. "You're beginning to be the subject of speculation," Isabella said, as they shared a bottle of modest wine. The untouchable Xavier Montero suddenly interested in community development and dating a college professor. "Does that bother you?" he asked, watching her reaction carefully. "I'm more concerned about what people are saying to you," she replied. "This can't be good for your fearsome image." Xavier found himself smiling, a genuine expression that had become more frequent in her presence. "My fearsome image has served its purpose. Perhaps it's time for something new." Later, they walked along the neighborhood's winding streets. Xavier had never known such simple contentment, the warmth of her hand in his, conversations that held no strategic advantage, laughter that served no purpose beyond joy. When they reached her apartment, Isabella invited him in for coffee. Her home was small but filled with books, plants, and photographs, evidence of a life rich in connections rather than possessions. "Tell me something true about yourself," she requested as they sat on her balcony. Something no one knows. Xavier stared into his cup. I was 12 when my family lost everything, he said finally. My father's company collapsed under suspicious circumstances. He killed himself rather than face bankruptcy. Isabella's hand found his. I'm so sorry. My mother and I were evicted from our home, he continued, the words emerging from a place he'd sealed off decades ago. We moved into a one-room apartment in a neighborhood not unlike this one. I watched her humiliate herself daily, begging former friends for help that never came. Is that why you built your empire? To never be vulnerable. Again? Xavier nodded. I swore I would become so powerful that no one could ever hurt us again. By the time I succeeded, my mother was gone, and I'd forgotten any other way to exist. And now? She asked gently. Now I'm sitting here wondering if everything I built was just an elaborate prison. His hand trembled slightly as he sat down, his cup. You make me question everything, Isabella. She leaned forward, her fingers tracing his jaw. Maybe some questions need asking. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with an intensity that startled them both. When they separated, Xavier saw in her eyes the same wonder he felt, the recognition of something neither had been searching for yet somehow found. The following weeks brought a contentment Xavier had never known possible. Mornings in the boardroom, evenings with Isabella, teaching him about art, literature, the simple pleasures he'd denied, himself in pursuit of power. He found himself laughing more, listening more, seeing the world through her compassionate perspective. The board's concerns intensified. Stock prices wavered as word spread of Xavier's reformation. Rival companies sensed weakness, initiating aggressive moves against Imperio Global's interests. We need to discuss your recent behavior, Helena Vasconcelos, the board chairwoman stated during an emergency meeting. This dalliance is affecting shareholder confidence. My personal life is not board business, Xavier replied coolly. It is when you start changing company policies based on the influence of an outsider, Helena countered. The Villa Madalena project is barely breaking even. You've rejected 3 highly profitable acquisitions, and now we hear rumors you're considering employee welfare programs that would cut significantly into profits. Xavier surveyed the concerned faces around the table, people who respected his ruthlessness but clearly feared his humanity. If the board has lost confidence in my leadership, you're welcome to vote me out, he challenged. The room fell silent. No one had the courage to oppose him directly. As Xavier left the meeting, his assistant Sophia handed him a sealed envelope. This was delivered by messenger, marked urgent and personal. Alone in his office, Xavier opened it to find newspaper clippings from 20 years ago. His blood ran cold as he read the headlines. Montero Enterprises collapse linked to corporate sabotage. Investigation points to rival Oliveira construction. The final item was a photocopy of a legal document, a signed confession from Eduardo. Oliveira later retracted, admitting to industrial espionage against Xavier's father's company. A note in elegant handwriting accompanied the clippings. Before you throw everything away for love, remember what her father did to yours. Some debts can never be repaid. Xavier stared at the evidence, memories resurfacing like bodies rising. From a lake, his father's despair, his mother's tears, the shame that had fueled his ruthless ascent. All supposedly caused by the man whose daughter now held his heart. The phone on his desk rang. It was Isabella, her voice warm with affection. Are we still meeting for dinner tonight? Xavier closed his eyes, the confession burning beneath his fingertips. Xavier, is everything all right? Yes, he answered, his voice betraying nothing of the storm within. Everything's fine. I'll see you tonight. He hung up, then called his investigator. Find out everything about Eduardo Oliveira's connection to my father's company. Everything. By tonight. The cruel billionaire who had been dormant for weeks stirred back to life, awakened by the possibility that his vulnerability, his love, had been nothing but an elaborate trap for revenge decades in the making. The restaurant Xavier had chosen overlooked the city, its light spreading like fallen stars beneath them. Isabella smiled as he pulled out her chair, but her expression faltered when she noticed his distant gaze. "You haven't heard a word I've said," she remarked after describing her day. "What's wrong?" Xavier studied her face, searching for any hint of deception. Could those eyes, so honest, so warm, be part of an elaborate vengeance? "I received some disturbing information today," he finally said, sliding the folder across the table. "About your father and mine." Isabella's brow furrowed as she examined the documents. Her face paled, hands trembling slightly. "Where did you get these?" "That doesn't matter," Xavier replied coldly. "Is it true? Did your father destroy mine?" "No," she whispered, looking up with tears forming. "It's not what you think." "Then explain." His voice was sharp as broken glass. Isabella took a deep breath. "My father worked for your father's company when he was young. He discovered accounting irregularities, evidence that someone was embezzling funds. When he reported it to senior management, he was framed for the crime." She pointed to the confession. "They threatened to prosecute my mother, who worked in the accounting department, unless he signed this. He retracted it once he found evidence clearing them both, but by then my father had already killed himself," Xavier finished, his throat tight. "Yes." Isabella reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "My father spent years trying to find who was really responsible, but the trail led to powerful people who buried the evidence. He never knew your father had a son, Xavier. When he discovered who you were at that board meeting, it nearly destroyed him." "Convenient story," Xavier said bitterly. "And I'm supposed to believe you didn't know who I was when we met? That this wasn't some elaborate scheme to make me pay for what happened to your family?" Pain flashed across Isabella's features. "Is that what you think of me? That I would use love as a weapon?" "Love is always a weapon in the right hands," he responded, echoing a philosophy that had protected him for decades. Isabella stood, dignity intact despite her tears. "I fell in love with the man I thought existed beneath all that armor, Xavier. I see now I was mistaken." She placed her napkin on the table. "The real tragedy isn't what happened to our fathers. It's that you can't recognize truth even when it's standing right in front of you." As she walked away, Xavier remained frozen, the familiar numbness returning to shield him from the pain of loss, a defense mechanism perfected since childhood. Later that night, his investigator called. "Sir, I've completed the research on Eduardo Oliveira." "And?" Xavier asked, staring at the untouched whiskey in his hand. "Everything his daughter told you checks out. Oliveira was a whistleblower who got framed. But I found something else. The signature authorizing his termination and the police report against him. It wasn't your father's." "Whose was it?" Xavier demanded. "Mateus Ferreira's father. He was CFO at the time, and it appears he was the one embezzling funds. When Oliveira discovered this, the Ferreiras orchestrated his downfall. The evidence suggests they knew your father would check the accounts personally at the end of the month and discover the truth, so they accelerated the company's collapse." The glass shattered in Xavier's grip. "And the documents I received today? Based on the handwriting analysis, the note came from Helena Vasconcelos. She and Mateus have been allies for years." Xavier ended the call, blood dripping from his cut hand onto the pristine floor. The betrayal was complete. Not from Isabella or Eduardo, but from those he had trusted his entire adult life. By dawn, Xavier had a complete picture. Mateus and Helena had manipulated him for years, using his trauma and thirst for vengeance to build an empire that primarily benefited them and their allies. When Isabella threatened to change him, to heal the wounds they relied upon to control him, they had deployed the ultimate weapon, his own past. The board meeting Xavier called that morning was brief and brutal. Evidence of decades of manipulation and underhanded dealings was presented. Security escorted Mateus and Helena from the building as shareholders looked on in shock. But the victory felt hollow. Xavier had reclaimed his company but lost something far more precious. It took him 3 days to find the courage to go to Isabella's apartment. When she opened the door, her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "I need to speak with your father," Xavier said formally. "Would you arrange it?" Isabella studied him for a long moment before nodding. Eduardo was waiting at the same cafe where they had rekindled his career. The older man's expression was guarded as Xavier sat across from him. "I owe you an apology," Xavier began, the words unfamiliar but necessary, "and much more." He explained everything, the manipulation by Mateus and Helena, how they had used both families as pawns in their quest for power. "I spent my life becoming the monster they needed me to be," Xavier concluded. "I've lived a life dedicated to the wrong kind of justice." Eduardo was silent for a long time. "I lost my career and reputation," he finally said. "But you lost your parents and your childhood. Between us, you've paid the higher price." "What I did to you at that board meeting," Xavier started, "was exactly what they groomed you to do," Eduardo interrupted. "The question is, who will you be now that you know the truth?" Xavier had no answer. As spring transformed Villa Maddalena, Xavier transformed Imperio Global. Employee welfare programs were implemented. Predatory acquisitions were replaced with ethical partnerships. The company's vast resources were redirected toward community development and environmental sustainability. The business press called it a miraculous conversion. Those who knew Xavier recognized it as something else, a return to the person he might have been before grief and manipulation twisted his path. On a warm evening, 6 months after the confrontation at the restaurant, Xavier found himself back at the flower stall where he had first seen Isabella. The festival was in full swing, lanterns illuminating familiar streets. She was there, arranging lilies just as before. When she saw him, her expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Your father tells me you're changing the world," she said as he approached. "I'm trying to correct my course," Xavier replied. "It's harder than burning everything down." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "The difficult path usually is." "I miss you," he admitted simply. "Every day." Isabella's composure wavered slightly. "I miss the man I thought I knew." "He exists," Xavier said. "He's fighting to break free from the prison I built around him, but he needs help. Your help." "I can't save you, Xavier. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking for the chance to become worthy of you." He held out his hand. "Walk with me? Just for tonight?" Isabella hesitated, then placed her hand in his. "Just for tonight." As they moved through the festival, Xavier understood that redemption wasn't a destination but a journey, one that would require dismantling the fortress he had built around his heart brick by painful brick. The path forward was uncertain. The wounds of the past would not heal overnight. Trust, once broken, required more than apologies to rebuild. But as Isabella's laughter mingled with the music around them, Xavier felt something he had forgotten existed. Hope. Not the calculated optimism of business projections, but the fragile human hope that even the most damaged hearts could learn to beat truly again. In the end, what Eduardo Oliveira and Reynaldo Montero had lost through betrayal, their children might reclaim through forgiveness, the most powerful form of defiance against those who profit from hatred and division. The cruelest irony, Xavier realized as he watched Isabella's face in the lantern light, was that in pursuing power to protect himself from ever being hurt again, he had nearly destroyed his only chance at genuine happiness. "What are you thinking?" Isabella asked, noticing his intense gaze. "That some fortunes can't be measured in billions," he answered softly, "and that I've been the poorest rich man in Brazil." She smiled then, tentative but real. And in that smile, Xavier glimpsed the possibility of a different kind of wealth, one that had eluded him his entire life. The abundance that comes from being truly seen, truly known, and somehow, despite everything, truly loved. The crystal chandelier scattered prisms of light across the marble floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom. Alexander Blackwood adjusted his custom Brioni suit jacket with a practiced flick of his wrist, his platinum watch catching the light. At 38, he commanded the room not just with his 6'3" frame, but with the gravitational pull that came with a net worth of $27 billion. "Another successful quarter," remarked James Chen, sliding a champagne flute toward Alexander. As his CFO and oldest friend from their MIT days, James was one of the few people Alexander permitted to speak to him without an appointment. Success is the baseline, James. It's mediocrity I can't tolerate, Alexander replied, his eyes scanning the crowd of New York's elite. These charity galas bored him, but appearances mattered in his world. Alexander's phone vibrated. The Taiwan semiconductor deal was proceeding. Another billion in play. He smirked. You know, James started. Not everything is about acquisition. Alexander arched an eyebrow. When you've built what I have from nothing, you can lecture me. James sighed and nodded toward the entrance. Caroline's here. I invited her tonight, hope you don't mind. Alexander followed his gaze and froze. Next to James's wife stood a woman he'd never seen before. She wore a simple emerald dress, her dark hair falling in loose waves around shoulders that carried themselves with quiet confidence. Unlike the other women who orbited his circle, her makeup was minimal, her jewelry modest. Who is that? Alexander demanded, surprised by the urgency in his own voice. That's Elise Reyes. She's an environmental architect consulting on Caroline's museum project. Brilliant woman. Published in... Alexander cut him off. Introduce us. James looked surprised. Look, Alex, she's not your usual type. She's... Did I ask for your assessment? Alexander's tone was sharp. James looked at his friend closely. She's not a merger to be acquired, Alex. She has a mind of her own. All the more interesting, Alexander replied, straightening his tie. As they approached, Elise Reyes turned. Her eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber, locked with his, neither impressed nor intimidated. For the first time in years, Alexander Blackwood, the man who could buy anything, felt something he couldn't name, something he couldn't control. Ms. Reyes, Alexander said, extending his hand. His usual commanding tone softened just slightly. I understand you're reshaping our skyline. Elise's handshake was firm. Mr. Blackwood, your reputation precedes you. Does it? His smile didn't reach his eyes. And what reputation is that? That you build empires without considering what stood there before. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. James and Caroline exchanged glances. No one spoke to Alexander Blackwood that way. Alexander leaned slightly closer. Then perhaps you should educate me on what I'm missing. I doubt you have the time, Elise replied, the corner of her mouth turning up ever so slightly. Alexander's phone buzzed again. He ignored it. For the first time in as long as he could remember, the billion-dollar deal could wait. Try me, he said. And in that moment, beneath the chandelier's fractured light, something shifted in the universe of Alexander Blackwood. The man who had everything suddenly discovered something he might not be able to acquire, and the thrill of that possibility awoke something long dormant in his calculating heart. 3 weeks passed. Alexander sat in his penthouse office 68 floors above Manhattan, the city grid glowing like circuitry beneath evening clouds. He stared at the environmental impact report on his desk, but saw only Elise's face. Sir, the board is waiting, his assistant's voice interrupted through the intercom. Alexander had orchestrated 3 accidental meetings with Elise since the gala, at James's dinner party, at the museum fundraiser, and at the city planning commission. Each encounter left him more unsettled than the last. She challenged him, intellectually refused his invitations twice, and worst of all, seemed completely unimpressed by his wealth. Mr. Blackwood, his assistant's voice again. Tell them I'll be down in 5. Alexander loosened his tie. The Mackenzie project, a luxury high-rise development that would cement his legacy, was facing opposition from environmental groups. Elise's name was on a petition against it. In the boardroom, presentations droned on until Alexander cut through the noise. What's being done about the opposition? Marcus Reed, his PR director, cleared his throat. We've prepared statements addressing each concern, but there's one particular voice gaining traction. An environmental architect named Elise Reyes. Her research on sustainable urban development is making waves. The room disappeared around. Alexander, what are her specific objections? She claims our development will destroy one of the last natural watersheds in the area, disrupting an ecosystem that— Hire her, Alexander interrupted. The room fell silent. Sir? Marcus looked confused. Offer her a consulting position, triple whatever she's making now. James, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. Alex, I don't think Elise is for sale. Alexander shot him a look that would have wilted anyone else. Everyone has a price. Later that night, Alexander's driver pulled up to a modest brick building in Brooklyn. The neighborhood was worlds away from his usual haunts. No doorman, no valet. He checked the address twice. Alexander knocked on apartment 4B. When the door opened, Elise stood before him in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair tied back. Behind her, books lined the walls and a half-finished architectural model occupied her dining table. Her surprised expression quickly hardened. Mr. Blackwood, how did you find my address? I make it my business to find what I want. He extended an envelope. A proposal for your professional consideration. Elise didn't take it. Professional or personal? Both can be negotiated. She crossed her arms. I'm not interested in being one of your acquisitions. Alexander stepped closer. Then consider it a challenge. Show me how wrong I am about development. Change my mind from the inside. And if I still oppose your project after seeing your plans, then I'll know it truly lacks merit. Elise studied him carefully. You've never admitted the possibility of being wrong before. Perhaps I've never had adequate opposition. Their eyes locked and the air between them seemed to crackle with unnamed tension. She finally took the envelope. I'll review it. No promises. As Alexander turned to leave, he noticed a photograph on her wall. Elise with an elderly man in front of a small house surrounded by trees. Your family? Her expression softened slightly. My grandfather. He taught me that even the smallest patch of earth deserves a defender. Alexander nodded, suddenly understanding something about her that spreadsheets couldn't quantify. Everyone needs something to fight for. As he walked away, Alexander's phone buzzed with crisis calls from 3 different countries. For the first time in his life, the empire he'd built felt hollow compared to the possibility of winning over one stubborn woman in a Brooklyn walk-up. What Alexander didn't see was Elise opening the envelope, her hands trembling slightly as she began to read. And what neither of them knew was that James Chen was watching from a car across the street, his expression troubled as he witnessed the collision course of 2 formidable forces, one that could either transform them both or destroy everything in its path. The Blackwood Tower conference room buzzed with tension. Elise stood before the executive board, her presentation slides reflecting in the polished table. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the scale model of the Mackenzie project. Your current design destroys a critical watershed, Elise said, pointing to blue lines on her diagram. But if we shift the building 30 degrees and incorporate these living walls, we preserve the ecosystem while actually improving your energy efficiency by 27%. Alexander watched her with undisguised fascination. 2 months had passed since she'd accepted his consulting role. 2 months of heated debates, late-night design sessions, and a growing awareness that beneath his ruthless exterior lay something more complex. The modifications will cost an additional $40 million, objected Victor Hargrove, Blackwood's longest-serving board member. That's an absurd concession to environmental sentimentality. Elise remained steady. It's an investment that will return threefold in reduced energy costs and increased property values. Not to mention preventing a public relations disaster when the community discovers what you're planning to destroy. Alexander stood. We're implementing Ms. Reyes's modifications, all of them. The room erupted in murmurs. Victor's face reddened. Alexander, you can't be serious. This is unprecedented. The shareholders hired me to make decisions. This is my decision. Alexander's voice was steel. Meeting adjourned. As the executives filed out, James lingered. That was quite a performance, he said when they were alone. Both of you. Alexander straightened his papers. Her designs are superior. Is that all that's superior about her? Alexander's eyes flashed. Choose your next words carefully. James sighed. We've been friends for 20 years, Alex. I've never seen you like this. Like what? Compromising, yielding, following someone else's vision. Alexander allowed himself a rare smile. Perhaps I'm evolving. Or perhaps you're so focused on winning her that you've lost perspective, James countered. I care about you both. Elise isn't another conquest. She has vulnerabilities you don't know about. Alexander's jaw tightened. What exactly are you implying? Her grandfather's land, the property in her photo, it's directly adjacent to the Mackenzie site. Did she mention that? The revelation hit Alexander like physical force. Had she manipulated him all along? Leveraged his attraction to protect her family's property? That evening, Alexander found Elise in the building's rooftop garden, silhouetted against Manhattan's skyline. You didn't tell me about your grandfather's land, he said without preamble. Elise turned slowly. I was going to. Today, after the meeting. Were you? His voice had returned to the coldness that marked his business dealings. Or was that just another strategic move in whatever game you're playing? Game. Her eyes flashed. You think this is a game to me? I think you've been extraordinarily successful at making me compromise. One has to wonder why. Because your project was wrong. Because sometimes the wealthiest man in the room needs to listen to someone who sees what he doesn't. And your grandfather's land had nothing to do with it? That land is where I grew up. Her voice cracked. It's where I learned to care about something bigger than profit margins. Yes, it matters to me personally, but that doesn't invalidate the science, the data, the objective reality that your original plan was destructive. Alexander stepped closer. And this, between us? Is that part of your strategy too? The question hung in the air between them. Elise's eyes glistened in the fading light. There is no strategy, Alexander. Only two people who see the world differently, trying to find common ground. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I need to know if any of this was real, she whispered. The man I thought I was beginning to see beneath the ruthless exterior. Is he real or just another acquisition tactic? Alexander's phone rang, his private line. James's name appeared on the screen. I need to take this, Alexander said. When Elise nodded and turned away, he answered. What is it? James's voice was urgent. The Taiwan deal is collapsing. Our competitors offered double. We need an immediate counter. Alexander looked at Elise's back, rigid with unresolved tension. I'll be right there, he said, hanging up. When he turned back to tell her he had to leave, the rooftop was empty. Only the wind remained, carrying away the words he hadn't said. Rain lashed against the windows of Alexander's penthouse as thunder cracked across the sky. 3 weeks had passed since the rooftop confrontation. 3 weeks of unanswered calls, of emails returned by Elise's assistant, of an emptiness he'd never experienced before. The Taiwan deal was secured, another $20 billion added to his empire. Yet Alexander stood at his window watching raindrops trace jagged paths down glass, feeling hollowed out. His intercom buzzed. Sir, Mr. Chen is here. Alexander didn't turn. Send him in. James entered, soaking wet. You look terrible, he said. What do you want? Alexander's voice was flat. To show you something. James placed a folder on the desk. The revised Mackenzie project plans. Your team implemented all of Elise's modifications, even the expensive ones. Alexander flipped through the pages. We had a contract. This goes beyond the contract requirements. James pointed to specific design elements. Your team voluntarily expanded the conservation area, added community gardens, solar arrays. They said you insisted on it. Alexander closed the folder. Is there a point to this visit? You've changed, James said quietly. The Alexander I knew wouldn't care about watersheds or community impact. Perhaps the Alexander you knew was incomplete. James studied his friend. Have you spoken to her? She made her position clear. Did she? Or did you walk away before hearing her out, like you always do when emotions get complicated? Thunder rumbled as Alexander turned back to the window. She had a conflict of interest she didn't disclose. Yes, she did. James sighed. But did you ever ask yourself why she accepted your offer in the first place? She turned down 3 more lucrative positions to work with you, positions that wouldn't have put her under such scrutiny. Alexander's reflection stared back at him from the rain-streaked glass. What are you saying? I'm saying some battles aren't about winning. James placed a small object on the desk. Her grandfather died last week. The funeral is tomorrow. Alexander looked down at the brass compass, its needle quivering. She'll be there, James said softly, before turning to leave. Not everyone measures worth in acquisitions, Alex. The cemetery was quiet the next morning. Fog clung to ancient oaks as mourners gathered around a simple grave. Alexander stood at a distance, watching as Elise, dressed in black, accepted condolences with quiet dignity. When the crowd dispersed, she remained solitary against the mist. As if sensing his presence, she turned. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across rows of headstones. Then Alexander walked toward her, stopping an arm's length away. I'm sorry about your grandfather, he said. Elise nodded, her composure fragile. Thank you for coming. I implemented all your modifications, and more. I heard. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Victory for the watershed. Not just for the watershed. He hesitated. The property, your grandfather's land. I've established a conservation trust. It can never be developed. Surprise flickered in her eyes. Why would you do that? Because I finally understand what you were fighting for. He gestured at the grave. Legacy isn't about how high you build. It's about what you protect. Tears welled in her eyes. He would have appreciated that. Alexander reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. The man you thought you saw beneath the exterior, he said quietly. He's real. Just unfinished. Learning. Elise interlaced, her fingers with his. We're all unfinished, Alexander. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Relationships, compromise, I've spent my life acquiring, not sharing. Then perhaps that's our next project. She looked up at him. Building something together instead of acquiring it. As they walked through the cemetery, the fog began to lift. No promises were made, no declarations offered. Just 2 people, walking side by side. Foundations forming beneath cautious steps. 6 months later, on the day of the Mackenzie Project groundbreaking, Alexander Blackwood stood before cameras not as a conqueror, but as a partner. Beside him, Elise unveiled the model of what journalists were calling the most sustainable luxury development in New York history. The Mackenzie Project would be renamed. In gold letters on the cornerstone would be inscribed, the Gabriel Reyes Community Center and Nature Preserve. Beneath the cameras and speeches, beneath the handshakes, and congratulations, Alexander felt Elise's hand slip into his. And in that quiet moment, the man who had spent his life accumulating wealth discovered the priceless value of what could never be bought, only earned, only given freely. In the end, the arrogant billionaire didn't conquer the heart of his best friend's acquaintance. Instead, she helped him discover his own. The spring rain pelted against the tall windows of Thorne Industries' executive floor, 63 stories above Manhattan. Elias Thorne stood with his back to the mahogany door, crystal tumbler in hand, watching the storm rage against the glass. At 42, he had amassed a fortune that rivaled small nations' GDPs. Today, his net worth had just crossed the 50 billion mark. Mr. Thorne? His assistant's voice barely registered. The West Side project team is assembled. Elias didn't turn. Make them wait another 15 minutes, let them remember whose time is valuable. The assistant nodded and disappeared. Elias checked his reflection in the window, sharp jawline, steely blue eyes, and not a single silver hair out of place. He adjusted his bespoke suit jacket, savoring the power that flowed through his veins. Few things compared to the rush of watching people squirm, especially those desperate for his approval. Across town, in a cramped apartment in Queens, Mira, Reyes wiped her hands on her apron. At 31, she had transformed her grandmother's recipes into a small but beloved neighborhood bakery that barely kept the lights on. The phone beside her buzzed incessantly. "Nathan, I can't talk now. Mr. Patterson wants his sourdough by noon and I'm still behind on—" "Mira, I got it. I actually got the interview." Her younger brother's voice crackled with excitement. "Thorne, Industries' final round today." Mira's stomach tightened. She'd read enough about Elias Thorne to know his reputation. "Nathan, wow. But be careful. That man, this is it, sis, my big break." Nathan had worked tirelessly to put himself through engineering school, unlike the privileged graduates who typically populated Thorne's ranks. "With this salary, I could help with Mom's medical bills, maybe even invest in your bakery expansion." Mira sighed. At 27, Nathan retained an idealism she'd long ago traded for pragmatism. "Just remember who you are," she said softly. In the Thorne Industries conference room, 8 candidates sat in uncomfortable silence. Nathan Reyes adjusted his only tie, the one Mira had given him for graduation, and reviewed his presentation one last time. Unlike the others in designer wear, his suit had been carefully selected from a secondhand store, altered by Mira's careful hands to fit his lanky frame. When Elias Thorne finally entered, the air seemed to crystallize. He didn't apologize for the 40-minute delay. Without acknowledging anyone, he slumped into the head chair and waved dismissively. "Impress me or don't waste my time." One by one, the candidates presented their solutions to Thorne's challenge. Revolutionizing urban infrastructure with minimal environmental impact. Nathan watched Thorne's reactions, the subtle sneer, the checking of his watch, the occasional, cutting remark that left presenters stammering. When Nathan's turn came, he stood with quiet confidence. His solution was elegant, combining established engineering principles with innovative material science that could reduce costs by 30%, while improving sustainability metrics. 3 minutes in, Thorne interrupted. "Where did you go to?" "School again." "City College, sir?" Thorne's eyebrow arched. "Not MIT? Not Stanford?" "No, sir." A smirk spread across Thorne's face. "And your father is—" Nathan hesitated. "He was a subway maintenance worker." "Was?" "He died when I was 12. Thorne's eyes gleamed with malice. "So, a scholarship case with a community college degree is going to tell me how to revolutionize infrastructure?" The room fell silent. Nathan stood frozen, feeling the eyes of every competitor. "Continue," Thorne said, now openly scrolling through his phone. "Though I suspect I've heard all I need to." Nathan pushed through, finishing his presentation despite Thorne's performative yawns and dismissive glances. When he concluded, Thorne leaned forward. "Tell me, Mr. Reyes, do you know the difference between you and actual qualified candidates?" He didn't wait for an answer. "My doorman has more pedigree. Your solution is pedestrian at best, dangerous at worst. People like you should stick to what they know, perhaps fixing elevators like Daddy rather than designing the buildings that house them." Blood rushed to Nathan's face as laughter rippled through the room. He gathered his materials with trembling hands, dignity crumbling before the cruel billionaire's gaze. Outside, the storm had intensified. Nathan stood in the downpour without opening his umbrella, letting the rain mask the hot tears streaming down his face as he called Mira. "You were right about him," was all he could say. Mira clutched the phone, flour-covered fingers whitening around the case. "Come home," she whispered. "We'll figure it out together." She didn't know then how Elias Thorne had just set in motion, a sequence of events that would intertwine their lives in ways none of them could imagine. The aroma of cinnamon and vanilla hung in the air of Reyes Bakery as Mira closed up for the night. 3 weeks had passed since Nathan's devastating interview. Her brother had spiraled into depression, barely leaving his room in their shared apartment. Tonight, she'd persuaded him to help with inventory, anything to pull him from the darkness. "I found something," Nathan said quietly, his laptop casting a blue glow across his hollow features. "Thorne's new urban development project, the one he ridiculed my ideas for, has critical flaws." Mira looked up from her ledger. "What do you mean?" "Their stress distribution calculations are off. If they build according to these specs, the support systems could fail catastrophically under certain conditions." Nathan scrolled through complex diagrams. "Lives could be at risk." "You need to tell someone," Mira said, alarm rising in her voice. Nathan's laugh was bitter. "And who would believe me? The community college graduate questioning Thorne's empire of engineers?" A bell chimed as the bakery door opened despite the closed sign. A woman in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit entered, surveying the modest establishment with keen interest. "I'm sorry, we're closed," Mira started. "Ms. Reyes?" The woman offered a sleek business card. "Camila Vega, VP of Talent Acquisition at Archer Dynamics." Mira frowned. "I'm not looking for a job." "Not you." Camilla's gaze shifted to Nathan. "Your brother." Nathan stood bewildered. "How did you—" "I was at Thorne Industries that day," Camilla said. "Your solution was brilliant. Elias Thorne is—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Not known for recognizing talent that doesn't come wrapped in Ivy League packaging." "Archer Dynamics is Thorne's biggest competitor," Nathan said suspiciously. Camilla smiled. "Precisely, and we've been watching his urban development project with great interest. Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private." Later that night in an upscale restaurant overlooking Central Park, Nathan listened as Camilla outlined a proposition that made his heart race. "We want you to lead our counter project," she explained, "and we're willing to invest in your sister's bakery as a show of good faith." Mira, who'd insisted on accompanying Nathan, narrowed her eyes. "Why would you invest in a small bakery?" "Because talented people care about their families," Camilla replied smoothly. "And we care about talented people." The offer was extraordinary. A 7-figure salary for Nathan, a substantial investment for Mira's expansion dreams, and a chance to prove Thorne wrong. Too good to be true. "What's the catch?" Mira asked. Camilla's perfect smile never wavered. "We need insider intelligence on Thorne's project. The flaws Nathan discovered, we need everything you can find." "You want me to spy?" Nathan said flatly. "We want you to ensure public safety," Camilla corrected. "If that structure fails because Thorne was too arrogant to check his work." The siblings exchanged glances, a lifetime of communication passing between them. 3 days later, Nathan found himself with a security badge and employee ID for Thorne Industries. Someone in HR had made a clerical error, hiring him for a middle management position in the urban development project. The irony wasn't lost on him as he passed through the same lobby where he'd been humiliated weeks earlier. "Mr. Reyes." A familiar, chilling voice stopped him in his tracks. Elias Thorne stood by the elevator bank, his cold eyes registering surprise, that quickly morphed into amusement. "I'm told you're joining our little project." Nathan's mouth went dry. "Sir, Human resources makes the occasional error," Thorne said dismissively. "But perhaps there's utility in having someone to fetch coffee." He stepped into the elevator, holding the door. "Coming? Or are community college graduates afraid of heights?" Meanwhile, across town, Mira received visitors of her own. 2 men in expensive suits who called themselves investors examined her bakery with calculating eyes. "Ms. Reyes, we represent a development group," the taller one explained. "This entire block is being acquired for a new Thorne Industries retail complex." Mira's blood ran cold. "This property isn't for sale. Your landlord disagrees." He slid documents across the counter. "Your lease termination. You have 30 days. That evening, as Nathan secretly copied files for Camilla, Mira sat surrounded by eviction paperwork. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thorn destroys anything in his path. The question is, what will you do about it? C. Nathan arrived home to find Mira staring out their apartment window. Something happened, he said immediately, recognizing her expression. He's taking everything, she whispered. The bakery, our livelihood. She turned to face him. Tell me about those structural flaws again. Nathan hesitated. If they're not addressed, and if certain conditions align, like high winds, combined with specific weight distributions, people could die, Mira finished. Yes. But Mira, I can't just let that happen, no matter what Thorn did. Mira's eyes hardened in a way Nathan had never seen. No, we can't let people die. But we can make sure Thorn loses everything else. That night, as Nathan slept, exhausted from his double life, Mira sent a message to Camilla. We need to meet. There's more at stake than you know. Across the city, in his penthouse suite, Elias, Thorn swirled amber liquid in a crystal glass, reviewing security footage from the day. His eyes narrowed as he watched Nathan accessing servers he shouldn't have authorized clearance for. Interesting, he murmured, reaching for his phone. Mr. Reyes appears to have hidden talents after all. The chess pieces were aligning, each player thinking several moves ahead, none fully comprehending the devastating endgame that awaited them all. Rain lashed against the windows of Archer Dynamics headquarters as Camilla Vega reviewed the files Nathan had provided. Each document further confirmed her suspicions. Thorn's flagship urban development wasn't just flawed, it was potentially catastrophic. These stress points would never withstand a Category 3 hurricane, she murmured, sliding the tablet toward Mira, who sat across the polished conference table. Your brother has provided exactly what we needed. Mira's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. 2 weeks had passed since she'd lost her bakery. The vacant storefront now bore Thorn Industries' development notice, a daily reminder of everything taken from her. And what will you do with this information? Mira asked, her voice controlled despite the rage simmering beneath. Camilla's perfect smile never reached her eyes. We'll ensure the project never reaches completion. Archer Dynamics will step in with a superior, safer alternative. Your brother will be credited as lead engineer. And the people who might be harmed, anonymous tips will reach the proper authorities before construction advances to dangerous stages, Camilla assured her. No casualties, just Thorn's complete professional ruination. Mira nodded slowly. There's something else you should know. She reached into her bag, extracting documents revealing Thorn's property acquisitions across Queens, neighborhoods targeted for revitalization that would displace hundreds of families. Camilla's eyebrows arched. How did you obtain these? I have resources of my own. Mira didn't mention the night she'd spent with Archer Dynamics' security team, infiltrating Thorn's satellite office. My point is, this isn't just about my bakery or Nathan's humiliation. Thorn is systematically destroying communities. Meanwhile, Nathan sat in a sterile conference room at Thorn Industries, sweat beading at his temples as he presented modified infrastructure plans, ones subtly correcting the critical flaws while appearing to maintain Thorn's original vision. So you're suggesting we reinforce these junction points? The project manager frowned. A minor adjustment, Nathan explained. Slightly increased cost now prevents catastrophic failure later. Interesting, a cold voice interjected from the doorway. Elias Thorn leaned against the frame, eyes locked on Nathan, especially since these specific concerns weren't in your original assessment. The room fell silent. Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears. My office, now. Thorn turned without waiting for acknowledgement. Nathan followed, each step feeling like a march to execution. Inside the palatial corner office, Thorn didn't sit, instead standing at the window overlooking his empire. Tell me, Mr. Reyes, do you think I'm a fool? Nathan remained silent. I know exactly who you are and why you're here. Thorn turned, his face eerily calm. Archer Dynamics recruited you after our interview, They're paying you to sabotage my project from within. Nathan's blood turned to ice. Mr. Thorne, Save it. Thorne raised a hand. The question is, what am I going to do with this information? To Nathan's shock, Thorne smiled. Here's what fascinates me. Your corrections are brilliant. The very flaws you identified, they're legitimate. He stepped closer. Someone of your background shouldn't be this insightful. Perhaps you underestimated that background, Nathan said, finding his voice. Thorne chuckled. Perhaps I did, which brings me to my proposition. The proposition was stunning. Thorne would triple whatever Archer was paying Nathan to become a double agent. He would feed Archer falsified information while actually implementing Nathan's safety improvements to the Thorne project. And my sister's bakery? Nathan asked. Restored with a 10-year lease, Thorne replied smoothly. I'm not unreasonable when there's mutual benefit. Nathan left Thorne Tower in a daze, calling Mira immediately. He knows everything, Nathan whispered into the phone. Mira's response was measured. What? Did you tell him? That I'd consider his offer. Across town, in a luxury condominium overlooking the Hudson, Camilla Vega received an unexpected visitor. Her assistant buzzed through. Mr. Thorne is here to see you. Camilla's composed demeanor faltered momentarily. She straightened her blazer and pressed the intercom. Send him in. Elias entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every room. Ms. Vega, lovely space. Cut the pleasantries, Elias. Camilla gestured to a chair. What brings the great Elias Thorne to enemy territory? The Reyes siblings. He settled into the chair, crossing one leg over the other. Clever recruitment. The brother has genuine talent. Camilla's expression revealed nothing. I don't know what you're talking about. Let's not waste time, Thorne said, his smile tightening. I know you're planning to expose the flaws in my development. What you don't know is that I've already addressed them. When your exposé breaks, you'll look like fools manufacturing corporate sabotage. Camilla leaned forward. You're bluffing. Am I? Thorne placed a USB drive on the table between them. These are the revised specs, including Nathan Reyes' brilliant modifications. I've already filed them with the City Planning Commission, dated 2 weeks ago. The color drained from Camilla's face. What do you want? A merger. Thorne's eyes gleamed. Archer Dynamics folded into Thorne Industries. You retain your position. Of course, everyone wins. And if I refuse? Then I release evidence showing Archer Dynamics attempted corporate espionage. The Reyes siblings would face charges as well. He stood to leave. You have 48 hours. That night in Mira's small apartment, the siblings sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the weight of impossible choices heavy between them. If I take Thorne's offer, I betray Camilla, Nathan said. If I refuse, we lose everything, including your bakery all over again. Mira stared into her tea. And if Camilla accepts Thorne's merger offer, Archer Dynamics ceases to exist. Hundreds lose their jobs while Thorne grows even more powerful. There has to be another way, Nathan whispered. Mira's phone buzzed with a text from Camilla. Emergency. Meeting. My place, 1 hour. When they arrived, they found not only Camilla but also a stranger, a silver-haired man with penetrating eyes and a distinguished bearing. This is Lawrence Archer, Camilla introduced them, founder and majority shareholder of Archer Dynamics. The man nodded gravely. I understand you've been caught in Elias Thorne's web. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to help untangle it. Mira frowned. What do you mean? Lawrence's weathered face hardened. Elias Thorne was once my protege. When he couldn't outperform me, he destroyed my reputation instead. Now he wants to consume the company I rebuilt from ashes. He turned to Nathan. You've seen the structural flaws in his project. What you don't know is why they exist. Lawrence produced an old photograph showing a younger Elias Thorne beside a dark-haired woman whose smile illuminated the frame. His wife, Valeria. She died when a Thorne building collapsed in an earthquake overseas. The flaws in this new development, they're identical to the ones that killed her. The revelation hung in the air like a thundercloud. Nathan finally broke the silence. He's recreating the catastrophe? Why? Because, Lawrence said grimly, Elias Thorne has been playing a far longer game than any of us realized. Dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in watercolor hues of amber and rose. Mira stood on the observation deck of the half-completed Thorne Tower, wind whipping through her hair as she surveyed the sleeping city below. The revelation about Valeria Thorne had kept her awake through the night, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into terrible clarity. "I didn't expect to find anyone here," came a voice behind her. Elias Thorne emerged from the service elevator, his usual immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. For a moment he looked almost human. "I wanted to see it for myself," Mira replied, gesturing to the skeletal framework surrounding them. "The monument you're building to your wife's death." If Thorne was surprised by her knowledge, he didn't show it. He approached the edge, standing beside her with calculated casualness. "Lawrence Archer always did have a flair for the dramatic. Did he tell you I murdered her too?" "He didn't have to. I've seen the blueprints, both sets. The official ones and the ones you keep locked in your private server." Mira turned to face him. "You're recreating the exact conditions that killed her." Thorne's laugh was hollow. "Is that what you think this is? Some elaborate suicide?" "I think it's something worse," Mira said quietly. "Penance." For the first time, Thorne's carefully constructed facade cracked. Something raw and wounded flashed in his eyes before he masked it. "My wife was an architectural engineer," he said, his voice distant. "She insisted the support structures in our Jakarta project needed reinforcement. I overruled her. Costs were already exceeding projections. When the earthquake hit..." He trailed off, staring at his hands. 37 people died, including Valeria. She was inspecting the very section she'd warned about. Mira watched him, seeing beyond the monstrous billionaire to the broken man beneath. "So this tower will stand," Thorne interrupted firmly. "Nathan's modifications ensured that. What I'm recreating isn't the physical flaw, but the choice, the moment of truth." At that moment, Nathan burst through the stairwell door, breathless. "Mira, I've been looking everywhere." He froze at the sight of Thorne. "Perfect timing, Mr. Reyes," Thorne said, composure instantly restored. "Your sister and I were just discussing architecture and consequences." Nathan moved protectively toward Mira. "I've made my decision about your offer." "Have you now?" Thorne's eyebrow arched. "I won't be your double agent," Nathan stated, "and I won't be Camilla's pawn either. As of this morning, I've submitted comprehensive reports to the City Planning Commission, the Architectural Review Board, and 3 independent structural engineering firms detailing the original flaws in your design and the corrective measures already implemented." Thorne's face hardened. "You've overplayed your hand. I'll bury you in litigation." "Perhaps," Lawrence Archer's voice echoed as he emerged from the elevator with Camilla beside him. "Or perhaps the world should know that Elias Thorne deliberately designed a fatally flawed structure, only to correct it at the last moment in some twisted atonement ritual." Thorne's gaze cut to the older man. "You always were sanctimonious, Lawrence. Shall we discuss your own architectural sins? The corners cut in Boston, Rio, Munich?" "The difference," Lawrence replied evenly, "is that I acknowledged my mistakes and corrected them. You've spent 20 years building a fortress of wealth and power to hide from yours." As the two titans faced off, Mira approached Thorne. "This isn't about your project anymore. It's about my bakery and all the other small businesses and homes you're destroying for your revitalization plans." "Business is business," Thorne dismissed. "Progress requires sacrifice." "No," Mira countered. "Progress requires balance, humanity." The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of a group in business attire, members of the City Planning Commission and Investment Board, accompanied by journalists. "Right on time," Camilla murmured, checking her watch. "What is this?" Thorne demanded. Lawrence smiled thinly. "Did you think we came without a contingency plan? These gentlemen and ladies are here to discuss the future of Thorn Industries and Archer Dynamics. What followed was a negotiation unlike any other, conducted 60 stories above Manhattan with the fate of communities, corporations, and personal redemptions hanging in the balance. After hours of tense dialogue, a framework emerged. Thorn would retain control of his company, but a new joint venture with Archer Dynamics would oversee all community development projects, with strict ethical guidelines and community representation. And the West Side project? One commissioner asked. We'll proceed with the corrected designs, Thorn conceded, with Mr. Reyes serving as lead safety engineer. Nathan's expression betrayed his shock. You want me to ensure nothing like Jakarta ever happens again, Thorn finished, a flicker of something resembling respect crossing his features. You were right, I underestimated you. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the unfinished tower, final terms were reached. Mira would not only regain her bakery but would head a community oversight committee, ensuring fair treatment of local businesses in all future Thorn Archer developments. Later, as the group descended to ground level, Mira found herself alone, in the elevator with Thorn. Why did you agree to all this? She asked directly. You could have fought. Thorn studied his reflection in the polished elevator doors. 20 years ago, I ignored someone who knew better because of my arrogance. Today, he paused. Let's just say seeing the same conviction in different eyes can be illuminating. 6 months later, Mira stood behind the counter of her expanded bakery, watching through the window as Nathan walked past with a group of engineers, pointing out features of the now completed Thorn Archer Community Plaza across the street. The complex incorporated affordable housing, small business incubators, and green spaces, a far cry from the sterile corporate monument originally planned. Camila Vega pushed through the bakery door, elegant as ever. Quite the transformation, she remarked, accepting the coffee Mira offered. Both the neighborhood and the man. Elias Thorn had become a more subdued figure in recent months. The arrogance remained, but tempered now with something approaching wisdom. His rare visits to the community projects always included time at Mira's bakery, where their conversations had evolved from hostile to cautiously respectful. People can change, Mira observed, when the cost of staying the same becomes too high. Some people, Camilla amended with a knowing smile. Others just find better ways to hide their true selves. That evening, as Mira closed the bakery, she found Thorn waiting outside. He looked different, the imperious billionaire replaced by something more human in jeans and a simple shirt. The memorial garden for Valeria opens tomorrow, he said without preamble. I thought, perhaps you and Nathan might attend. Mira studied him, this man who had nearly destroyed her family, then helped rebuild their lives through a strange alchemy of redemption and pragmatism. We'll be there, she said finally. As Thorn turned to leave, Mira called after him. It's never too late to become the person you might have been. Thorn paused, the setting sun casting his shadow long across the sidewalk. Valeria used to say something similar. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Perhaps that's why I couldn't quite destroy your brother that day. He reminded me of her, someone unafraid to challenge a powerful man's worst instincts. He continued, walking, disappearing into the gathering dusk, leaving Mira to wonder at the strange paths life takes, how humiliation can lead to vindication, arrogance to redemption, and how even the mightiest towers can be built, not to divide, but to elevate. Shuzo.